Hello and welcome to the Progressive Hub Show. My name is Ryan Black, managing editor at progressivehub.net and organizing coordinator at rootsaction.org. With me today is Sam Rosenthal, political director at rootsaction.org. Let's get right into it, Sam. Trump has been indicted again. The details you can go look up online, but what does this really mean for Biden? I think that's the important stuff for us. What are your thoughts on this? How's this going to affect Biden?
Yeah, so most of the coverage right now is about the details of the indictment, which are pretty thorny. I mean, it's like 37 felony counts or something. It doesn't sound good. And then there's a lot of sort of liberal publications, news publications, crowing about how this might really be the end for Trump, which we've heard, I don't know, 15 times, 30 times since 2019, or even earlier than that. But I think that a lot of coverage you're not seeing is like, what does this mean? What bearing does this have on an eventual Republican versus Democrat presidential election? There's a lot of talk about does this throw Trump out of the Republican primary? He's still the front runner by a lot, so that seems unlikely. And this is a big legal case, so it'll take months, if not years, to resolve. But I think that we have to start to wonder how this is going to impact the general election too. And one of the ways it might impact the general election is if Trump is truly out, that means that there's going to be a different candidate who's the candidate for president for the Republicans. And, that probably is a bad outcome for Joe Biden. I think a lot of what we've heard is that, in Biden's favor is that he's the guy who beat Trump last time. And so we should have him run again so that he can beat Trump again a second time, which I don't really ascribe to that theory. I don't think past performance is, indicative of future success, but nevertheless, this is one of the strongest things he has in his corner. But if Trump is really just totally weighed down by these legal problems, I mean, they really are piling up. And at some point, they're going to become a millstone, and it will just be too hard for him to overcome them.
Right.
It means that we're going to end up with someone like, Ron DeSantis in there. We're going to end up maybe with Nikki Haley in there. I mean, there are a lot of people who are lining up now to, take up the mantle here. And it's we're thinking about how well those people would do against Joe Biden, because it's a completely different race with one of those people at the top of the ticket.
Yeah, totally. And you're saying Biden being able to say that he beat Trump last time and therefore he's the candidate to beat him again, which is what the Democratic Party is saying, is what the liberals are saying, doesn't mean anything if Trump is not going to be the candidate. And you say it's one of his strongest tools in his bag. It's the only tool in his bag, as far as I can tell. It is the entire candidacy of Joe Biden this time, is we beat Trump last time and we can beat him again. He doesn't have a ton of real accomplishments to run on that impress progressives and activists and organizers. So really, I can beat Trump is all he's got. And if Trump actually is hurt by this, which I don't really think he will be, I think Trump is indestructible, Teflon Don. There's almost nothing you can do to convince his base that he's not the best guy for the job. While DeSantis is oftentimes hurting himself by making himself more well-known. He's not a likable guy. Nonetheless, it's interesting to think that if this actually hurts Trump, if he doesn't drag out this legal process for a decade or whatever rich guys are able to do with this stuff, the idea of 81-year-old Biden on a campaign trail that he's not going to be able to hit that hard against, what if it is a ticket of DeSantis and Haley, super young people who can do 10 events a day, every single day for months on end, getting nonstop media coverage the entire time, while Biden is going to have to do a light schedule because A, he's the president, he has a job to do, and B, because he is 81 years old. We don't like to make the age argument here, but it's just a reality of running for office. It's exhausting. So yeah, not really looking good. But again, I don't think this is really going to hurt Trump ultimately. I don't think it's going to do anything. Do you think it's going to hurt Trump in the primary?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it really depends on what the appetite is among his competitors for hitting him on this. We've seen already, Ron DeSantis is like carrying water for him. They're so terrified of him, and it's really funny to watch. But they feel like they'd rather hit the Justice Department over this. They'd rather say that this is a gross miscarriage of justice than say like, "Hey, my opponent got indicted on 37 federal counts," which in any other world, in any other arena, would just be like absolutely the kill shot you want for your opponent. So it really shows how what a black hole he is and how much he warps everything around him. That he has to have his opponents going to bat for him, who have like been critical of him in other ways, but it's just funny to watch them say like, you know, um, I disagree with Trump about this and that, but like on this issue of him, imperiling like state secrecy, which is supposed to be, sacrosanct to right wingers and hawks,
Right.
we're good with that. That's, I think the Justice Department is really overreaching. So pretty funny to watch that stuff take place. The other
Yeah,
thing
it's so
that
weird.
concerns me,
It's like the opposite of swift boating. They're taking the thing that is
yeah,
obviously his worst quality and they're saying, "No, no, no, don't worry about it," even though that's their opponent. It's the primary's already decided. Like, if they're
yeah,
that afraid of him, at what is gonna happen to make them bold? If he can be indicted and they're still not the other GOP contenders are still not bold enough to say anything bad about him, to try to peel his voters away from him, then why would his voters leave him? It doesn't.
totally. And like this is happening in a vacuum, so we'll see what happens when like the primaries actually get underway because there's just no check on his popularity right now. Like as far as people can tell, including like his competitors, he's by far the most popular person in the Republican Party. You have to be on board with him. I think the only way that we'll see people start to use this against him is if he totally tanks in an early state and it just turns out like people start to feel like, oh, so actually voters do care about this, even Republican primary voters. I think that's unlikely to happen. And I think where I agree with you is like if people are unwilling to use what's like probably the best talking point of the last, 3 or 4 decades against a political opponent, if they can't use that against him, then it's hard to conceive of like how someone else will beat him. Some will, like Chris Christie will go for him on it, but Christie probably won't make it out of like, the 2 to 3% range. So we'll
Yeah,
see.
Christie has no shot. I'm not even sure why he's running unless he's really running for a job at CNN or Fox News or something, which is
Right, right, right.
probably what he's doing. That's what I thought Pete Buttigieg was doing too in
Yeah,
2020.
yeah, and then he
Uh,
got saddled with a transportation
yeah, he
bummer for
unfortunately
him.
got a real job that he's not good
Yeah,
at instead of a other fake job that he would also probably not be good at. But I
yeah.
guess
The
this
other
then
thing
brings up.
too,
Oh, go ahead.
I just want to say, like, I feel like the real problem with like the maybe Trump's not on the table thing is that for most voters, like the 98% of people who aren't like us and aren't like gluttons for punishment and don't really pay attention to this stuff until very late in the process, I think are going to be really enticed by just like the new blood argument. So if it's like Trump versus Biden, it's like, okay, bummer, we have to pick one of these guys who are already like very known entities to us. But if like voters are turning on the TV and they see Biden and then they see two other people, some ticket that they're not that familiar with, DeSantis and Haley, or, Haley's at the top of the ticket, Tim Scott manages to get in there, whatever it is. I think that a lot of people will just think like, yeah, I mean, these people they're not Donald Trump. They seem like, fresh blood for the political scene. Like people aren't following, I think, for the most part, what's happening in Florida or, whatever Nikki Haley's been up to. And I just worry that that will be enough for some voters who are sort of like not very ideological to just say, yeah, I'll go for those people. Why not? And that's like a big trap also for Biden.
Right. I think we get to see how well DeSantis's Florida strategy works well in the rest of the country. That reminds me of Hillary. I remember talking to some Hillary folks back in the day, and they took their Florida strategy with Hispanics and used it in every other state. And they just did not change strategy from state to state for anything. And it was
Yeah,
obviously a
classic.
huge failure. So like how well will DeSantis's anti-Disney big state government stopping schools and colleges from teaching certain subjects and anti-trans stuff, the anti-woke stuff. They're going after Disney stuff is insane. But it's going to be interesting to see how well any of that translates to the rest of the country because the rest of the country is not Florida. And I don't think he knows
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it's probably too weird for everyone else. That's like my guess that it's just gonna seem like, why are you battling Disney World? You know, the place where dreams are made. Like, what's your beef with them? I think that's gonna be too strange, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that brings up the big question really is, can any of these clowns in the Republican Party who are running for president actually win? Or is it still just the two-person race of Trump and DeSantis, which everyone has said it's been for like a year now?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't looked at the polling recently. I think like it's interesting to think about what lanes are emerging, like where is everyone trying to position themselves, because one of the things we're really seeing is a resurgence of the like moderate Republican, the reasonable Republicans, while we
Mhm.
see a resurgence of like the Christian right. So these two like lanes that we used to really strongly associate with the Republican Party that were sort of like the hallmarks of Republican primaries are reemerging, and they're really like much more coherent ideologies. They have a lot less to do with the way like Donald Trump's calling it ideology is not right, but the way Donald Trump's like approach to politics has sort of suffused the Republican Party, and it's a very like traditional field really that's emerging. So you've got people like Chris Christie. I think Nikki Haley's probably going to be in the I'm a reasonable person lane. Tim Scott too, and then like Mike Pence is in. He's going to be hard in the like Christian right lane. So yeah, I mean they're all kind of pulling the same except DeSantis who's ahead. And then DeSantis is the guy who's really trying to grab the Trump mantle, right? Which is like I'm this erratic, like charismatic leader. I do, I go for the jugular. I find opponents and I take them down. It's really
I
like
hate the
an interesting
media.
test. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like it's like yeah, right. The media is my enemy. Like I find enemies and I eliminate them. This sort of like, yeah, very personality based, very oppositional style of politics that actually does not have like a strong ideological thrust to it, except that the enemies all end up being, people of color, queer people, etc., because they're like, the targets that seem most content rich to these like right wingers. Um, and it's this interesting test of like, can you replicate Donald Trump politics without being Donald Trump? Is this a third viable lane that's emerging for the Republicans? Or is it just specific to Donald Trump? I mean, this has been eternally the question about him, right? Like, is that a new thing, or is it just this one weird black swan thing and it's never coming back? So we'll see. I mean, so far, I don't know.
Yeah, and we may have to wait and see. We may not be able to know the answer to that until Trump is no longer the leader of the Republican Party and the key figure there, and obviously the leading presidential candidate. I mean, look at the polling. When was the first time he was indicted?
I can't even
Wasn't that
remember.
in March or April? I mean, that was like in
I
here.
know his polling goes up every time he's indicted.
Yeah, so he's indicted. It was around Easter, I want to say,
Yeah,
and his
yeah,
polling has gone up. And DeSantis's has gone down as he's made his foray into actual the public and not just Florida. So I think we're kind of proving out exactly what we expected. And meanwhile,
yeah,
yeah, all these other lanes are just too small. The evangelical right lane that Pence is in, I mean, the voters that he has to win over to join him are the voters who were trying to murder him. Like,
yeah.
why is he even running for president? They wanted to hang you and kill you. They blame you for Trump not being president, even though they still believe he is president. I don't even know if they still believe that. It's hard to tell. But
Totally.
yeah, I mean, and no one's doing anything. I mean, Pence at 5% is the closest to DeSantis. Haley 4.5. I don't even know who that is, to be honest. Is that the North
He
Dakota? No.
he's yeah, he's like the multimillionaire Vivek Ramaswamy. I mean, I think he's just kind of like he's like a, Andrew Yang for like the right sort of like I've got ideas and I've got good ideas and that I'm sort of like it's sort of like a technocratic thing, right? Like
Wow.
put me in there, except that he's also a right winger. He has right politics. But he's going to leverage his, business school experience or whatever to run the country like a business, and we'll all be in better shape. So I think I think we could get him on this show if we wanted to. Honestly, like I feel like he does any media appearance that anyone asks him to do. That seems to be the thrust of his campaign so far. Is like, I'll go anywhere, I'll talk to anyone. So,
We should
that'd
not
be
have
cool.
him on our show unless we have a really great bit planned for it because,
Yeah,
yeah, I'm
yeah.
not interested.
We could have
Uh,
him try to like make prank calls with us or something like
oh,
that.
that would be fun. That would be fun.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I don't
but yeah,
see any of these I don't see any of these Republicans doing any damage yet. I mean, especially since they're ceding the ground to Trump on his indictment,
yeah,
which is wild. Oh. So, I guess last question on that is what does that say about the Republican Party right now? I mean, the Republican Party completely indebted to Donald Trump for whatever reason, completely behind him, willing to back him no matter I mean, indicted twice for multiple dozens of felonies and also found I don't was he found guilty in civil court? I don't know if that's the correct word of
yeah,
sexual assault.
yeah,
Uh, so I mean, what could possibly happen
yeah.
that could hurt him? I can't think of it. And so, yeah, what does that say about the Republicans?
Yeah, I mean, it's like an interesting time because both parties have sustained these serious ruptures over the last like 8 years, and I think now it seems like the Democratic Party is like more or less on the other side of their rupture, where you had like Bernie come in and kind of blow up the party. There was all this uh, enthusiasm and energy around him. You had Hillary's loss, which was a big deal, totally unexpected, really damaging to people's like sense of what was happening there. And it seems like the party has mostly come to a detente with like the progressive wing, and they're figuring out how to work with them. And when the progressive wing of the party like throws a fit, it's like present and it's there, but it's not the like mainstream party doesn't freak out as much as they once did. I feel like they kind of know what to do now, which is like bad for us, and we need to like figure out a different way of approaching that. But for the Democratic Party, it seems like they've cohered more or less. And the Republicans are just still in the middle of this tumult. Like it's not clear because it's so located in Trump as a singular figure, because unlike Bernie, he's never folded into the party because he wasn't really part of the party to begin with. He has no sense of like how things actually function at the party level, nor does he want to have any sense. And so they're just still in this period of like real like norms changing, things being undermined. Their plans are all askew. And all they have to go on, I think this is the reason he's so powerful, is just like the power of Trump's appeal as like a singular person. Um, so it's like it's a weak party. I mean, I don't know what their long-term plan is. Like I don't know how you emerge from this on the other side absent Trump. He's in his 70s. Like he's not going to be alive forever. He's not going to be viable as a political actor for, a shorter time than that. So, I don't know what they see as like the long-term or even medium-term horizon, but it's a very messed up party right now.
Right. And I guess a lot of those same questions can be applied to the Democrats as well. I don't know what they
Yeah.
see as their immediate future. I mean, after Biden, I suppose they're relying on Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg to be the future of the Democrats, but I think voters have pretty clearly said no, thank you
Yeah.
to them. So,
And their problem's almost like the opposite, where they've suppressed like people with these sort of organic interest, layers of interest around them, or like cults of personality. I mean, in non-pejorative way, because that's like scary to the party. People like AOC who like just sort of generate a lot of media, a lot of attention by dint of like their charisma, and they've pushed all those people to the margin. So we have, as we've had for a while now in the Democratic Party, these like really technocratic kind of like tofu people who don't have a lot of inherent character in them. And yeah, I'm worried about those people's abilities, some of whom you just named, like to function as candidates, as like the top of the ticket. So that will be their problem definitely going forward. But the
right.
Republicans' problem will be like, who are we? And if like only a third of the electorate is into our party, what does that mean?
Right. Well, it seems the Democrats have more of their own problems right now. I don't know how much media attention this is actually getting, but the anti-war folks that I know, the peace community folks that I know, ever since that Nord Stream pipeline blew up, everyone's been pretty sure that the US had something to do with it or the West had something to do with it. although the U.S. likes to blame Russia for it, there's obviously no evidence that says that they did it. There's also no logic that says Russia did it. And now let's share this new intelligent report from that guy who leaked all the documents on Discord reveals that the CIA and Europe knew about the plot to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline 3 months before it happened. Uniquely, Biden also mentioned that he knew that we would be able to stop that thing if we needed to as well, like a year ago. So, yeah, I mean, what does this say about the Ukraine situation if Ukraine, the country that we're providing billions and billions of dollars for, very well may have, or at least players in the Ukrainian military very well may have been involved with blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, which is an act of terrorism, a huge environmental disaster, maybe the biggest man-made environmental disaster ever, I believe I read.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the first point about this is obviously, if these reports are true, of course,
Right.
there's no way that Ukraine would have done this without not just our knowledge, but tacit approval from the U.S. Like, otherwise, this would have been a firestorm, and we would have been extremely upset with them. And they wouldn't have done this without approval from the U.S. And I also think it just like it shows how so much of like warfare and making war really affects citizens so much more than it affects like the policymakers. I hesitate to call them that, but people who are spurring the war on. I mean, this is like obviously like an environmental disaster, but it's also just sort of like economic terrorism. I mean, the effects of this sabotage were like mostly carried by normal like working Europeans who had this like seriously um, forced the prices of oil to skyrocket. This is like it's something that people were feeling sort of day to day in their pocketbooks, and something
Yeah,
that had no
the
real consequences.
the immediate
Policymakers.
material issue for people was a whole bunch of Germans had to go through a cold winter and they didn't have the natural gas they needed to heat their homes, or yeah, I think that was it. So like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
actual people were being put at serious risk because of this financial, economic move that the U.S. made, which is essentially what it was.
Yeah, and I think it just shows like so it's as always in war, like citizens are so much more impacted, but also like just the precarity of the situation we're in. This is like if you believe the Ukrainian narrative and it's a Russian act of terrorism, there's also there sort of downstream implications for that too. And the more that war bleeds out into the civilian sphere, and especially like beyond the borders of Ukraine, the more of a chance there is for something to go wrong that triggers a much larger catastrophe. And I think that is the risk we run as the war goes on longer and longer and longer, is that everything is on a knife's edge right now. And we're talking about, Russia's a nuclear power. Ukraine has tons of material from us. NATO has nukes at their disposal too, obviously. And the longer the war goes on, the more of a chance there is that something is going to tip over the line, whether it's sort of like, the effects from a pretty like weird plan like this. I mean, sort of an out of left field sabotage plan like this, or something more prosaic, like someone, accidentally shells like a residential area of Poland or something like that. Which has already happened a bit, but if 50 people die or 100 people die, it's a very different order of magnitude of crisis. And it's just, this is the risk of an ongoing land war in such a dense area, such a, from a population density perspective, dense area of the globe.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's bad news. And when none of the parties are really pushing for peace, when the U.S. is sending billions and billions of dollars, writing blank checks for weapons over there, and Blinken just this week made very clear that calls for a ceasefire that the U.S. does not support and will not support, despite China and Lula da Silva in Brazil trying hard for a peace process, trying for a ceasefire and negotiations. the US is not going to engage in that, which means what? Which means that we're going to be fighting till all the Ukrainians are dead or all the Russians are dead or Putin just gives up. I don't think Putin is going to give up. I don't think he's going to admit he made a terrible, terrible mistake, which he did do. He's not going to do that. And they're a nuclear power. And so worst comes to worst, if we back a nuclear power into the corner enough, well, eventually they're either going to use nukes or they're just going to give up completely and say we've built all these weapons for nothing and we had never had any intention of using them. And I don't think that's the case.
Yeah,
So,
sadly, I mean, there seems like, from Russia's perspective, from Putin's perspective, there's no limit to like the amount of lives lost of,
no.
young Russian men mostly that he won't tolerate. I mean, it just seems like this can go on forever. And for Ukraine, I mean, it's an existential struggle for them. Like they've gauged it correctly in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there is no limit for them in that respect too, because it feels like a battle for existential defense. And it just seems like the only way a conflict like this can be resolved is by intervention from the rest of the world's community,
Yeah.
and not just like fueling this ongoing war more and more and more, to really like satisfy political ends on the US's behalf for the most part. This is a political calculus on the part of policymakers, um, and it has a lot to do with the way people in this country and lots of people in the Democratic Party, which historically has been sort of the more dovish party, or should be the more dovish party, but the
Yep.
way the Democratic Party got to thinking about Russia the country during the Trump years because of this constant incessant drumbeat of Putin's puppet and so on. And there's a lot of smoke there. I mean, there were obviously there were relationships between the Trump administration and actors in Russia, but is that justification for letting this, war drag on and on and on, for just continually fueling carnage in Ukraine? I don't think it is. So it's
Right.
important for us to be clear-eyed about what's happening.
Yeah. And it's important to point out how difficult it is to be clear eyed in a country largely controlled by corporate interests. Who are we supposed to learn the truth from about Ukraine when the news media did not cover the Ukrainian civil war that's been taking place since 2014 after a US backed coup, essentially, in the country? Essentially. Uh, uh, and not to mention today, the news media loves war coverage. They've always loved war coverage. That's what people want to see. That's what makes them money. That's what gives them the advertising dollars. So they don't really have an incentive at all to promote any kind of peace or negotiation talk or dialogue in any way. And meanwhile, all the while, the best thing for weapons manufacturers is an open war supported by the public that they can pour money into, that they can test new technology, uh, and then they just get to watch their stock prices go up. And all the millionaires and billionaires here in the States are making money. And those are the same people funding everything else. So you just have this whole system that is pro-war because of the profiteering that comes on the back of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really outrageous. Like there was a report a few weeks ago that got almost no coverage that weapons manufacturers have been price gouging around the Ukraine war, um, which is like should just be such an extreme scandal. It means that American taxpayers, who are already funding this war to the tune of billions of dollars, probably reaching trillions soon, uh, now are also overpaying for the weapons that we're sending to Ukraine. So, as you say, like weapons manufacturers are making more and more money quarter over quarter. This is the best period ever. They're like Raytheon, I think it's Raytheon CEOs on record saying, we've had like a gangbusters year. This is the best it's ever been for us, and it's because of this war. I mean, um, it's because weapons manufacturers are practically salivating at the idea that finally we have a ground war between two really well developed militaries. It's like the moment they've all been waiting for. And we're all too happy to continue to supply material. And this is like, it's our tax dollars that are going to this. And our military budget just keeps getting increased. It was increased in the debt ceiling compromise. It's been increased again by a subsequent Ukraine war spending bill. So, there's almost no coverage of this, and we really need to like understand that that's the price we're paying, right? We're we're not in a military hell zone, like, thank God. But
Right.
we, like here in this country, are paying a lot of money to fund a war that really has no end in sight, and are being price gouged on the back of the whole thing.
Right. And meanwhile, we don't have healthcare, and our education is terrible, and our
Right.
infrastructure is garbage, and we're gonna keep sending as much money as we can over there.
Yep.
Moving on, the PGA, the Professional Golf Association, and Live Golf, which is owned and operated by Saudi Arabia, they are now trying to merge, something that nobody thought would happen for people who have been following the story. There's been a ton of animosity between the golfers in the PGA and the golfers in Live. They don't like each other. They've said terrible things about each other. The guy who was running the PGA said terrible things about Live, said they would never merge. And yet here we are, less than a year after Live started. They are now merging, and the Saudis will have a ton of access, a ton of control over the entire world's golf apparatus, essentially. Why? Why are they doing this? One of the huge reasons is sports washing. They tried to buy WWE. They have a lot of investments in F1 racing. They're currently making a ton of investments right now in soccer and soccer players, which is the world's shared cultural phenomena. I mean, it is the pursuit of the world's culture is soccer, essentially. And they have control of that now, or they're wanting more control of that now, and they do, or at least are attempting to have control over all of golf right now. Sam, you think this is actually going to happen? You think this is actually going to go through?
I
And
don't
why
know.
does
I
it,
can't tell what's
more
going to happen.
importantly, is why does this matter to regular people? Why does this matter to the left, who probably mostly don't give a shit about golfing?
Right. Yeah, I'm not a big golf guy. I'm not. I get too frustrated. I've tried to play golf a couple times. I get too frustrated out there on the course. Uh, but it seems, I have my various sports publications and podcasts I listen to. It's the NBA finals, so I'm like, I got to listen to all my podcasts about that. And just hearing how shocked people were about this was really alarming. I mean, I feel like it was like truly like a cataclysmic event for people who follow golf closely. And as you say, like totally out of left field. No one knew this was going to happen. Um, I'm not sure if it's going to go through. It seems like there's a groundswell of momentum for people, for Congress or someone to act to block this on an antitrust basis. And there's a strong argument there, right? Like this is these are two competing actors in the same sphere, which is televising professional golf and bringing professional golf to the masses. And if they merge, that's then there won't be really any competition. It will just be one entity that basically has, as I understand it, like contracts with all individual contracts with all of like the top golfers in the whole world that anyone wants to see play on TV. So like I think leftists should support trust busting like all the time. We should always support it because we do far too little of it in this country. It's an important tool to use. It's not like the end all be all. I mean, it still accepts a kind of like corporate configuration, but it's an important tool for limiting the power of corporate actors. And we used to do it much more in this country. We've really moved away from that. So I think we should support that. But I also think like it bothers me a little bit because there are like so many more glaring examples, I think, of monopoly creation, of unfair competition, unfair competitive practices that we've seen over the last like decade or so, especially in the tech sector, where you have entities like Meta who just basically anytime a company seems to be moving in on their territory, they just buy them up and they incorporate them into Facebook Meta. And there's very little talk about trust busting except for like the farthest left electeds that we have talk about it, but it never gets any traction. And so suddenly everyone's up in arms about this, and it's looking like this is a serious possibility. And so I have to wonder a little bit why that is, and I think it has something to do with the fact that there's this like sheen of xenophobia to the whole thing. This feeling of like, oh, it's it's this foreign actor, it's this sort of like non-white entity that wants to take control of our beloved, American pastime of golf. And I think that that's one of the reasons people have become so inflamed about this. And I wish that we would see like the same level of ardor for trust busting when it's, Mark Zuckerberg like buying yet another tech outfit or something like that. So that's what like bothers me about this. But maybe it'll bring it into the public consciousness. I don't know.
Right. It's really easy to complain about Saudi Arabia buying up the PGA Tour because you use Facebook every day, or so many people use Facebook every day. They're not going to use Facebook, then turn around and protest Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, it's just like they don't feel like they provide a service. The xenophobic lens, obviously, it's really easy for Americans to drop back into that. But the lesson there isn't that we shouldn't be going hard on Saudi Arabia. The lesson is that we should be going hard all the time on every other instance of this antitrust issues that keep going on. And progressives and the left in general need to just be stronger about trust busting, about identifying when these things are going on and actually running campaigns to stop them. I think
Yeah.
it's easy to get public support around stopping these things when you can show how bad it hurts people. Hopefully this is stopped and PGA and Live aren't combined, if not for anything, but because Saudi Arabia murdered and chopped up the body of Jamal Khashoggi and regularly commits horrible human rights abuses and is engaged in a terrible, brutal war in Yemen that's killing thousands and thousands of people and destroying cities with the US's support, of course. But it doesn't make it good. It's all
Yeah.
bad. It's all bad.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, to be clear, there's like, there's xenophobia operating, and then there's also like an accurate assessment of Saudi Arabia as like an ultra authoritarian, ultra right
Yeah.
government that you know, whose like modus operandi we shouldn't really welcome into our cultural sphere, as a government actor. I think another interesting wrinkle here too is that there's, a prize, an international relations prize for a long time has been the normalization of relations between Israel and various Arab states, and Saudi Arabia is the one that's really in the news right now. And Blinken has been really, I mean, it's clear that this is something he wants for his resume, that he wants these normalized relations. He's really gunning for it, and so I'm curious to see what bearing, if any, that has on the way this shakes out. If there's going to be the administration putting their finger on the scale a little bit to try not to rock the boat, for on the diplomatic end. So that will be something to watch.
Right. And it's also key from an environmental perspective. It's key to think about how oil plays into this Gulf merger, which is
Or yeah,
weird, and how the US reacts to it. The US is at all times in some way partially like afraid of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia can cut off oil and increase our gas prices a ton
yeah,
anytime they want to. They do it all the time. So you have to think, with green energy becoming more abundant, more efficient, solar power and wind and water, all of these things coming into focus a little more. Is Saudi Arabia afraid of losing some of their power that they have essentially from having tons and tons of oil? And are they trading that for some sort of cultural power? If they can own all the sports, it's not that the governments have to respect that. It's that the populations of, if we're not allowed to see golf on TV anymore because there's a dispute between Saudi Arabia and the US, it's a bunch of rich white dudes in the US who are going to flip out. And those are the type of dudes who can get change to happen because they have tons of money and cultural capital and all, and they're taken seriously and whatever you want to say.
yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah, I mean, is that an angle you think? Is there that weird environmental, they're taking this long road to swapping oil power for some sort of cultural power?
Absolutely. I think, right now they have unlimited money effectively.
Yeah.
But they know it won't stay that way forever. And they know that, I mean, some kind of green transition is coming. I don't know what it's going to look like. It's obviously too late already, and it will be too slow as it happens. But ultimately, there will be at least some move away from fossil fuels. And so I think part of this is just pure like diversification of portfolio. They
Right.
need other assets that are going to kick off huge amounts of money. But then because they don't really produce anything else in Saudi Arabia. They're they have a single asset right now that's
Cash
buoying the
crop.
whole country.
Right.
Yeah. Um, but I think, yeah, also it's about, peddling soft power and increasing the toehold on the international stage. And I think knowing that, they're sort of culturally, they're a very hermetic country and they don't have a lot of influence outside of that doesn't run through oil, and doesn't
Right.
run through like that sort of geopolitical space. It's not like a country that has a big cultural footprint, that has a big footprint otherwise. And so I think that sort of subtly extending their tendrils and getting into fields of entertainment, figuring out what Western audiences are plugged into and getting a toehold there is really important. It's completely part of the sort of reform project they're on, which really has nothing to do with reforming the human rights
No.
dimensions of how that country is run, but I think has a lot to do with sort of like reforming their image, reforming their reputation, and becoming more of a seen as a more benevolent actor because they're enmeshed in like the cultural fabric that we're all enjoying together.
I think that's absolutely right, and I think it's terrifying
Yeah,
that we're just gonna go on like they've done nothing wrong. One of the I guess interesting, I guess I'd say, it was like the victims of 9/11, the families of the victims of 9/11
yeah,
came out strongly against this merger because they're aware, as most of the country probably actually isn't, that Saudi Arabia was a little more responsible for 9/11 than anybody else.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
you know, we're just like, I mean, I was 11 when that happened. It's the most important cultural event in my lifetime for sure. And it seems
yeah,
like we do not care anymore. We're back to
yeah.
engaging in endless wars, which basically never stopped. And we're treating Saudi Arabia like they're our best friends. So
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, I really think that that was such an interesting component of this story, like where, 15 years ago, if the 9/11 Families Fund objected to something, it would have been dead in the water.
immediately.
Um, and I just, yeah, I think we've moved past that moment culturally for folks like you and me who grew up with that as kind of like the organizing principle of
Yeah.
what was happening in American society while we were coming of age. It's hard to like think about that, it's sort of really in the rear view now, but it is. And it's a new era and it's a new geopolitical regime that's ascended here. And they just don't, I don't think that the invocation of 9/11 has nearly the power it once did. And I don't think people really care to relitigate it either. And that's all good for Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I agree. They've washed that away just like they're going to sports wash a lot of other things away through this merger and through their investments in other sports.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate. All right, Sam, great talking with you today. We will do this again next week.